My name is Zisan Swain. I'm an artist slash illustrator. I wanted to touch bases with you guys to let you know that I had got permission from the man himself, Raleigh Martin, to do the comic book based off his novel called The Coming of Tan. When I first met Raleigh Martin, well, before I had met him physically, it was my uncle who had turned me on to his book called The Coming of Tan. When I first read the book, at first I felt like, I was like, how can my work match what this man has in his book? I mean, it was an awesome read. And I was a little skeptical of it. You know, I kept giving excuses to my uncle because my uncle one day, he was like, you really need to do the Raleigh Martin's comic book. And, I kept giving excuses. I was like, his book is deep. I don't know if my artwork can match what he has in the book. So at that time, my mind was on other things, and I had worked on a comic book with a so-called friend. We wind up having a falling out because he was taking my work and he was capitalizing off of it, and he was kind of like doing it behind my back. So we pretty much, I had to leave that alone. So when Raleigh came to Atlanta for a convention that he was doing, that's when I finally got a chance to meet him. And I remember him saying to me when I first met him, he was like, "Ihsan, And I was like, "Hey, Raleigh." He was like, "It's good to see you again." Now, I had never met this man in my life. I didn't even know who he was, based on as far as his book was concerned, yes. I did know about him through his book, but I never thought that I had met him physically. You know what I mean? And during his, he had an intermission at his convention. He had an intermission, and he went outside to smoke a cigarette. And so I followed him along with another guy, and as we were going out the front, because he had the event at the Sheraton Hotel, and when I was following him to the out front of the Sheraton Hotel, he was sitting outside in the front, and I kind of stepped off to the side because I really didn't want to crowd him. But for some reason, my inner self kept saying, "Go over to him, go over to him." So, that's what I did. And he was talking to the young guy. The young guy was talking to him, and I remember him saying, "I don't care what you do with the Biabian symbol." And he looked over at me. At the time when he was talking to the guy, he looked over me and one eyebrow went up, and he said, "All I ask for is 10%. And at that time, I really didn't know what he was talking about. I had no idea, why he was speaking about the 10%, the Biabian symbol, because in my mind, I was like, I'm not going to do anything with the Biabian symbol. I mean, I don't even, you know what I mean? Like, nah, so later on, after he left Atlanta or whatever, I had woke up one day and I was just like, you know what? I really want to do a comic book, but I don't know what I want to do it on. So, so I went over to my uncle's store, and, mind you, he had already said to me a couple of times, like, "Ihsan, you really need to do the Raleigh Martin comic book." So when I went into the store, he had looked at me. I had said, I was like, "Unc, I really want to do a comic book," you know what I mean? And he kind of like gave me this look like, "Man, how many times I got to tell you?" You know what I'm saying? And that's when the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, he's right. I need to do the Raleigh Martin's comic book. So that's how that all began and how that all started. And I would call Raleigh, you know what I mean? Well, actually, when it finally went off in my head, I had told my uncle, I said, "Listen, before I even attempt to do anything like this, I'm going to make sure that I can get permission from the man himself, Raleigh Martin, to see if it's possible I could do the comic book. So he was like, what are you waiting for? You know what I mean? He was like, the office, use that phone in the office right there. And I was like, okay, you know. So I went on and I called Raleigh. And I had asked Raleigh for permission. And he said, you know, son, I like go-getters like yourself. You know, he said, go ahead. He said, go ahead and do up the contract. You know what I mean? Send it to me. I'll sign it. I'll have Eron sign it, and we'll send it back to you. So that's a little bit of how it all began. You know what I mean? And at the time, I started to build a rapport, and I would call Raleigh on a regular basis. And he was telling me things that would like literally blow your mind, man. I mean, some of the things that he had enlightened me with, and told me, you know, things about myself that, you know, I remember at the Sheraton Hotel, he had another intermission, and we went into this like bar that they had inside of the Sheraton, and I was sitting on one side, he was sitting on the other side, and I started telling him about the story of when I lived on 48th and Sansom Street in Philadelphia, and I was telling him how these beings would come into my room at night when I was young. I was about 6 or 7 years old. And it would happen pretty frequently. And after I had told Raleigh about the story, he paused for a minute. And he looked over at me, and one eye went up. You know, one eyebrow went up again. And he said that, Ihsan, they've been coming for you. Like it was no big deal at all. You know what I'm saying? So he told me, I said, well, how do I know, Raleigh? How do I know? He said, through your work, Ihsan, through your work. And he was speaking about my artwork and the other types of creativity that I have besides my artwork. He was explaining to me that they had been coming for me a long time ago. So he told me one thing that he has expressed to me. He said, do not rush your memories. He said it will all come back to you, but don't rush it. Don't rush your memories. And as the story goes on, basically, you know, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you want to, you know, that's your opinion, whatever you want to feel. But based on what the memories that have been coming back since the time that I have started on this comic book since 2010, I realized why Raleigh said it's good to see you again, Ihsan. Because I was one of those beings that was on the ship with him when he was younger than he was now. He was much younger. Maybe he was much older than me during the time when we was on the ship. And I didn't realize it at the time. You know what I mean? But when he was telling me not to rush my memories, and the book started to rekindle memories of when me and him had met, you know. But I don't want to stretch the story out too long. You know, I'm truly dedicated to presenting the Coming of Tan comic book to all of his followers and people that are known and unknown. I want to be able to share his experience in his book to the masses in picture form this time. You know what I mean? So you can get a clear visual of what he actually saw out in the universe. So I'm starting to understand my purpose to this whole project. And I want to be able to share that with the world, you know, of the many life forms and beings that he's seen while he was aboard the mothership. And I want to take it to another level. I mean, to the point, you know, where now, you know, where he, you know, was introduced to the Howard Stern show. I mean, I want to bring a lot to the table, you know, and with your support, you know, hopefully we will be able to make this a reality. You know, as far as the critics, you know, I'm going to let you go ahead and do your job. Go ahead and criticize. But the bottom line is this is going to be the best comic book that you ever seen in this day and time. Because I'm introducing it. It's not just on some superhero thing. Yeah, that's fine, but it's actually telling a life story of this man's life and his experiences while he was away from the planet Earth. And I want to share that with you guys. So hopefully, you know, if you see, if you see my work on Twitter and what we're attempting to do, please support our campaign. Peace and blessings to everyone. I hope to be a great asset to bringing forth the Coming of Tan comic book. Peace and blessings.